I guess the Lee brothers are out for revenge this time, huh? This time on Scrolling Down the Belt. I can't wait to see what happens with Marion next. Released a year and some change after the original, Double Dragon 2: The Revenge is all about escalations. You might remember the opening scene of Double Dragon 1, where Billy Lee's girlfriend Marion was punched in the gut and kidnapped by the Black Warriors gang. Well, this time they straight up shoot her dead right in front of the Lee brothers' garage, which now seems to contain a helicopter. The biggest change, though, is the control scheme. Double Dragon 1 was pretty easy to understand. You punched, kicked, and jumped in the direction that you were facing. But the one found in Double Dragon 2 is nearly identical to a previous Technos Japan arcade game, Nekketsu Koha Kunio-kun, aka Renegade, which we've covered right here on Scrolling Down the Belt. But to refresh your memory, you have one button that attacks to the left, one that attacks to the right, and one that jumps. If you attack in the direction that your character is facing, you'll always get a punch. If you attack in the opposite direction, you'll get a kick. Hitting one of those directional buttons in combination with a jump will give you a jump kick. But new to Double Dragon 2, and probably taken from the Famicom port of Double Dragon 1, is the spin kick, which is done by jumping and hitting any attack button during the jump. This is handy for things like avoiding tractors. You can still elbow, but it's not the be-all end-all that it was in Double Dragon 1. They nerfed the elbow! This time your go-to move is the humble back kick. It's got range, it's got priority, and there are a couple of tricks you can use against the bosses with it. And because this is Double Dragon, you'll need them if you're going for a 1-credit clear. But one thing that did not escalate in Double Dragon 2 is the graphics. They look more or less like those found in the original game from the previous year, though that isn't to say that some character sprites haven't been refreshed. All your favorites are back. We've got Williams, Roper, Linda, Chin Taimei, who first appeared in the Famicom port of Double Dragon 1 and now is completely different, and of course, Machine Gun Willie! The Black Warriors have also added some new members to their lineup as well, such as Ohara, Burnov, Abore, and wait, is that just a Bobo with long hair and a mustache? Sorry, I guess he's Bolo now. And instead of the final boss being Machine Gun Willie, though you definitely still fight him in a very familiar setup to before, it's a doppelganger shadow clone of you. And yes, if you're playing 2 players, you'll fight 2 doppelgangers. He can do the same moves as you can, and also this horrible thing where he disappears, and if you're not far away or in the air when he reappears, your health just gets drained. Your biggest enemy, though, is the timer. The levels are a bit too long for the small amount of time it gives you, and even if you're very good and know all the tricks, you'll almost certainly lose at least 1 life to the clock. If you manage to clear Double Dragon 2, you get this cursed image during the ending, with tears coming from Marion's eyes, which implies that yes, she is actually dead. Double Dragon canon is fluid at best though, so don't expect that to be true for very long. This game actually came out in America first, November 1988 versus March 1989 in Japan, which cements Double Dragon as the Western audience first title that director Yoshihisa Kishimoto has confirmed it to be in interviews over the years. Game Machine put it at 7th place on the Best Hit Games 25 list of their April 1st, 1989 issue, but Double Dragon 2 did not seem to show up in the Gamest Awards at all the year that it came out. And honestly, I think that's because this game just doesn't do a lot that the first Double Dragon didn't. When most gamers of a certain age think of Double Dragon 2, they're actually thinking of the port to the NES and Famicom in December 1989 in Japan and the following month in America. This was developed and published by Technos Japan themselves, cementing that they'd more or less shifted their focus more toward Famicom and NES development by this point. The NES version still has the Renegade-style control scheme, but it adds 2 new moves that are pretty key to plowing through enemies quickly: the uppercut and the hyper knee. To uppercut, you jump and hit attack in that direction just as you hit the ground. For the hyper knee, you jump, hold the direction you're attacking in, and hit both buttons at the same time to send your enemies rocketing across the screen. Mashing works pretty well for both of these because the timing window is pretty specific. Apart from that, the back kick is pretty reliable in this version of the game too. All of the set pieces you remember from Double Dragon 2 were in this port, not the original arcade version. No one remembers the tractor, they remember the helicopter coming down and shooting at you. Or Stage 3 that actually took place inside the helicopter where you get to knock enemies out of the opening doors. However, I regret to inform you that they've doubled down on the amount of platforming from the NES version of Double Dragon 1. Why? This is one of my big gripes about this title, and I feel like most people with fond memories of it probably have conveniently forgotten about this part. Either that or they're monsters who like jumping with 2 buttons instead of 1. And at a total of 9 stages? Double Dragon 2 on the NES is much longer than I remembered. If you want to face the true final boss, you have to play on the highest difficulty level, which is significantly more difficult. That, combined with the fact that the powerful moves are not necessarily very easy to pull off, can make Double Dragon 2 on the NES a bit more of a frustrating experience than many of us old-timers remember, or than new players might expect. It's still the more memorable version, and rightfully so, but it may not shine so bright upon revisit. Though that could have been because I wasn't playing it with a second player. By the way, this is the version that has all the story. You get these in-between level cutscenes that double down on Double Dragon taking place in a post-apocalyptic world. Marion is killed off screen by the Black Warriors gang here, and not by Machine Gun Willie just opening fire in the street. Each mission also has its own name, the 5th being the Forest of Death. Famitsu gave this version a 6, 7, 7, and 6, putting it at a slightly lower score than they gave the Famicom port of Double Dragon 1. One reviewer criticized it for being too straightforward of an action game compared to the odd hybrid that the original Famicom game was with its RPG elements, though he also acknowledged that it had gone through some evolution since the first title. Of course, there was plenty of criticism for the new control scheme being hard to grasp. Another reviewer even mentioned that its increased focus on story didn't necessarily do it any favors. Just cutting in real quick to say that my book, Gameplay Harmonies, Japanese recording artists and the video games about them, is on sale right now at limited run. If you like obscure retro games and or Japanese music and want to see how they intersect, this is for you. It's about video games that actually starred Japanese recording artists, not just featured their music. It goes all the way from the Nintendo Famicom to the Sony PlayStation 2 and spans genres from platformers to edutainment. It's also full of titles that never left Japan. I did an intro video to it on this channel, and the link to buy the book and watch that video will be in the description. Okay, bye back to the video. And oh boy, do the ports not end there. Of course, it had versions on all the usual computer platforms of the day. The ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, Amiga, and Atari ST. But whereas Double Dragon 1 had a Western-exclusive Genesis Mega Drive port that didn't make it to Japan, Double Dragon 2 has a Mega Drive port that didn't leave Japan, developed by Palsoft. And wow, is it a stinker! It clearly tries to stay closer to being an arcade port, but just performs terribly on the Mega Drive hardware. Everything moves so slowly, even with very few enemies on screen, and the hitboxes are just something else. They also made Mission 2 much longer, and really leaned into the idea of the conveyor belt being there during the boss. It was just bad decisions all around. Apparently, it even suffers additional input lag if you use the Mega Drive 6-button controller. The only thing that I can say in its favor is that it makes for an interesting remix version of Double Dragon 2 in some ways. The weapons don't disappear when you scroll the screen, so you can actually fight the first boss with one. All in all, though, this is only superficially like the arcade game and is deeply unpleasant to play. The enemies sound like they're barfing when they die. And it's easy to understand why. Famitsu scored the Mega Drive port a 4, 5, 6, and 3. It was generally considered by them to be lacking in every possible way. Bad controls, horrible sound, and inferior graphics compared to its other Mega Drive contemporaries. One reviewer mentioned that these graphics were more on the level of the Famicom. I mean, the Mega Drive had Streets of Rage by this point. A game called Double Dragon 2 released in the West in 1991 on the Game Boy, but it was not originally a Double Dragon game at all. It was, in fact, the 1990 Game Boy entry into the Kunio-kun series. Nekketsukoha Kunio-kun Bangai Rantohen. They redid the graphics, music, and added story to make it more Double Dragon-y. It only shares a name with Double Dragon 2. The combat system is very different and much more simple. There are of course attack and jump buttons, but pressing them together causes the player to kneel, and pressing them a second time does this uppercut. There's also a collar grab instead of the classic hair grab due to its Kunio-kun roots. The most interesting port, though, was by far the 1993 version on the PC Engine CD-ROM. This was released well after Double Dragon 2's relevance had passed, but this is an absolutely insane version of the game. And though it's loosely based off of, I guess, the Famicom Double Dragon 2 since they recreated the scene inside of the helicopter, it's kind of its own unique version and experience. It has a crazy arranged soundtrack that goes from everything to this song in the first level with laughs and screams in it, to this second level song that's actually kind of a jam. It has between level cutscenes that look like they were done in MS Paint and are fully voice acted. Was there ever a more PC Engine CD game than this one? And though it features most of the same moves, it just feels so much more different than any other port. It's not a good conversion of Double Dragon 2, but it's incredibly fascinating to play. Famitsu put this version at a 5, 6, 4, and 4, one whole point above the Mega Drive port. Given that this one came out in a post-Final Fight world, I don't think the reviewers could tolerate a control scheme like this anymore. One mentioned that it felt rushed, and was panned by everyone for having small character sprites, since belt scrollers at the time had been moving toward much larger ones than this. And though Double Dragon 2 has appeared on many collections since, it had one other odd appearance in 2013. On the Xbox Live Arcade service for the Xbox 360, Double Dragon 2 Wander of the Dragons was developed by Korean studio Gravity. It was loosely based on the original game and not only looked, but apparently also played like absolute garbage. No one liked it, and it got horrible reviews across the board. If you need proof, it currently holds a score of 17 on Metacritic. The late Game Informer magazine summed it up best with this statement: "There are absolutely no redeeming qualities to Double Dragon 2. The only people I can recommend this to are gamers that enjoy hate playing the worst stuff just to make fun of it, or Double Dragon fans who can't help but play every release no matter how horrible." I'm sure that makes some of us feel seen. In the end, Double Dragon 2 was much more of a revolution in the home than it was in the arcade. I remember seeing ads for the NES version of this game everywhere you could advertise to kids. Comic books, game magazines, and even on TV. And I never saw this game in the arcade at the time, whereas I absolutely saw Double Dragon 1. But for as much as I hate to say it, upon revisit, I do think that this shows signs of the franchise declining, even though most people associate that with 3. The arcade version was just not even really a step forward. And while I clearly remember it being a big deal at the time, the NES version, at least through a modern lens, may not be as thrilling now as people remember it being when they were kids. Even though you could elbow your way through Double Dragon 1 without too much trouble, I think I find it to be a more satisfying experience than 2. I also suspect that maybe Technos Japan's heart was always more in the Kunio-kun series than in Double Dragon. Though I guess time will tell, since we'll be covering more of those games here soon. Next time on Scrolling Down the Belt, beautiful Tecmo Nights.